development, political economy, public economics, group inequality, and poverty measurement. Her research explores on how social institutions interact with public policies to shape patterns of economic and social inequality. She is on the executive committee of the International Economic Association, on the governing body of the Indira Gandhi Institute for Development Research, and a trustee of the NGO Srijan. She is also an elected fellow of the Econometric Society. We are delighted to have her with us today. So, on behalf of School on Economics, ma'am, I welcome you to this session. I am also honored to introduce the chair of the session, Professor R. Vijay, Dean, School of Economics, University of Hyderabad. His keen research interest areas are new institutional economics, development economics, and agricultural economics. We are privileged to have him with us as chair. With this, I request Professor R. Vijay to proceed the session.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to have you here. So she had come here for a meeting at IOE directed governing body. So we requested her saying, can she spend one more day and interact with our students? So it's pleasure and thanks for spending one more day here. I think students would love it, and we are looking forward for the talk. The talk is also very interesting in a sense. I was interested in the issue of social norms. I do some courses where I like issues. So the combination of public policy and the presence of strong social norms was an interesting topic and has interesting implications of looking at public policy and in terms of norms. So we are looking forward for your lecture. So it's maybe an hour that we would work with that and maybe take a question answers of 15, 20 minutes, right? Thank you.
All right, everyone can hear me. So just a small correction, I'm no longer on the governing body of IJIDR, and there was something else that I'm also no longer on the board of. So, okay, so so this paper, as Ravi was saying, it's about public policy in the presence of social norms. And what I'd like to do today for the students in the audience. Yes. A little bit closer. This is better? Yeah? Yeah? That's better. All right, great. Right. So part of what I want to do is to present some research. We've been doing this over the last few years, and I've been presenting it in a number of places. But more importantly for the students here, I'd like to give you a sense of how to think about research, because that's where you really are. You're at that stage in your life. And so in that spirit, I want you to think about questions you have in that spirit. So when you ask me questions, don't feel you need to ask me necessarily questions about this paper. Ask me anything at all that you like. I'm here for you. I'll do the best I can. All right. So what led to this paper? Firstly, I should say that this was started when one of my PhD students, Divya Gupta, who now teaches at the Jindal Law School, started working on one of these programs. There are a lot of programs all over the country which give conditional cash transfers for gender-based policies. And so she started working on one program in Haryana. It's called the Apni Beti Apna Dhan program. There are now programs like that all over the country. This was one of the earliest programs. And then we came together with a group of researchers in the University of Gothenburg in Sweden who were working on similar issues. And then one of my research assistants, who was a Delhi School MA student just like you, Ananya Iyengar, started working on the project. And so it's all 5 of us that are co-authors on this. So I just wanted to acknowledge their contributions before getting started. All right. So what's the background here? Starting in the late 90s, 2 big countries in South America started conditional cash transfers. One was Mexico with Mexico's Progresa program, and the other one was Brazil with Bolsa Escola. And these programs were very large. At their peak, they covered 25% of the country's population. So, that is to give you a sense of how big they were. And they were mostly regarded as very successful. And so, that started a new trend of thinking about cash transfers for public policy. And so, these were two programs that were started around 1997, and in 10 years by 2007, all over Latin America, you basically had programs for social protection that were cash transfer programs, conditional on achieving a certain set of outcomes or a certain set of behaviors. And today we have conditional cash transfer programs in over 60 countries of the world. So, it has become a major lever through which public policy is influenced. Now, a lot of these programs are about getting children immunized, getting them to school, things like that, and they have worked in that domain. And so, the question that we were trying to ask here is, will they work in other domains? Will they work when you want to reduce marriage payments? Will they work when you want to reduce child marriage? When you want to, in Africa when AIDS was a big problem, will they work in altering sexual behavior, things like that, genital mutilation. So, will they work in areas that have strong social norms, and then will they work to undermine these norms? And so, that was the bigger question that we were trying to ask. And the evidence that we have so far on this was a bit negative. We did not really find, there has not been empirical evidence that these programs have worked in the presence of social norms. They have not worked to undermine those norms. Right? And so, one natural way of thinking about this is to say, I mean, norms are ingrained, they are culturally driven, culture goes back thousands of years. And so, why would you expect a cash payment today to change things that are fundamental about the way we live, right? And so, one response could be that, right? And we took a different approach, all right? So, our approach was really to say that norms, it is true, they have come down a long time. But suppose you take the approach that people in the world are not fundamentally different. The norms might be different, but I do not think young women in Hyderabad would be fundamentally different from young women in Delhi, and I would go as far as to say I do not think they would be fundamentally different from young women in Michigan or somewhere else, right. So, suppose you take that approach and you say, look, people are roughly the same. There is a distribution of tastes. Some people like to go for jobs, some people would be happy not to go for jobs, some people want to be academics, some work in the corporate sector. We all want to do different things. But there is a distribution of preferences, and this distribution is the same across different societies or different social groups. Suppose you take that position, then there is a different way of thinking about norms. Then you can think that for whatever reason, one society reaches a particular historical equilibrium with a particular set of norms, and another society might reach a different equilibrium, all right. And so, when you think about norms in that way, then what you are doing is thinking about incentives in a very different way. So, suppose I say that in every society, right, there are 15-year-olds who do not want to get married until they are 25. And there are 15-year-olds who want to get married when they are 16, right? And this is true in every society. Now, suppose that you have strong social norms that say that you should get married around the age of puberty, and you have them for one group and you do not have them for another group, right? Then what is happening is that the group with strong social norms is going to be pulling in people who really do not want to be at the norm, whereas the group with weak social norms is going to have a lot more people doing what they would do in the absence of social norms, right. Now, when you look at it this way, then what is happening is that the marginal person who is indifferent between following the group norm and not following the group norm is very different in the presence of social norms, And that's what we're going to push. We're going to look through the implications of that. Okay. Okay. And what we're going to come up with is a theoretically surprising result. And that result is that actually it might be the groups with strong norms that respond the most to your cash incentives, rather than the group with weak norms. And so I want to take you through that logic, and then what I'd like to do is present some data that seems to confirm that theoretical conjecture. So that's the plan for today, right? Okay. So let me just say that again very briefly. Without norms, suppose there were no norms, then the preferences of the marginal beneficiary are independent of their social group. If there were no norms, then all 18-year-olds who want to have a career will have a career and then get married. It doesn't matter what their group is. Now, when you have the social norm, then the persons who are getting married are going to be affected by the group that they're going to be in. So the probability that a girl will be married at any given age depends not only on her preferences and her parents' preferences, but it also depends on which group she's born in. Okay? And so that's what we're trying to explore. And what's the main implication of that, which is the bottom line of the paper really, that transfers allow beneficiaries in strong norm groups to take actions that are closer to their preferences. Okay? So one of the reasons we got interested and have been working so long on this paper is that there's a knee-jerk reaction that social norms generate social capital. Sure they do. You know, it means that you can ask someone for a job, you know someone, you can go and stay with them, and when you go to a new city, you can borrow money from them. All those things are true. But social norms for some subgroups within a group also lead to reduced agency. And this might be true especially of women. And so what conditional cash transfers can do is, for those subgroups, it can also provide agency. And that's what we're trying to explore here. All right. Okay, so that is by way of introduction. What I'd like to do now is introduce a model of marriage norms, and then I'd like to test the conjectures from the model using evidence on the Apni Beti Apna Dhan program. So what we're going to do is combine details of this conditional cash transfer program with DHS data from the National Family Health Survey round 4, and we're going to try and test out some of the predictions we're getting from our model, and then I just have a couple of remarks at the end and then your questions. Okay, and if something is unclear, then please stop me in between. There's no problem doing that. Okay, all right, so here's where you have to concentrate a bit. All right, so what are households? Whenever we're setting up a model, we have to think about the different players, right? It's just like any kind of game, no? You have the umpire, you have team A, you have team B, you have the rules of the game, okay? So that's what you're trying to do when you're setting up a model. And one thing that we lose sight of is, when do we want to set up a model? For the students in the room, we want to set up a model when there's something we can't figure out and we think it will help us figure out. So we don't build models to, models are abstract to be useful. Okay? They are not realistic depictions of the world. They are trying to take out what it is in the world that you don't understand and trying to zoom into it. Okay? So that's what you want to do. So you want to think with any particular problem. I can be looking at an issue, and depending on what aspect of that issue I'm interested in, I will build a slightly different model. So what I'm interested in is varying norms. Okay, and so I want to keep everything else very, very simple. So how do I do that? So households are one set of agents here. Okay, households belong to a social group G, and they have an income level M. For now, just think of that income level as the same for every household. Okay, we'll change this as we move along. Okay, this is the important part. Every household, and we're not distinguishing between parents and girls right now, between daughters and parents right now. we're just assuming unitary, what we call unitary households, and we're assuming that each household has a preferred age of marriage, and that age of marriage is what we call AP. Okay? And AP differs, all of you, when you were 12 or 13, if someone asked you what do you want to do, it would be different. When do you want to get married, it would be a different answer. Who do you want to get married to, that would also be a different answer. That might be completely imaginary, right? But it would be different. And so this is P for your preferred age of marriage, and this has some distribution. And so this is the CDF, this is the distribution function for that random variable, which is a preferred age of marriage. Okay? And the domain of that is A lower bar, A upper bar. Can everyone see the board at the back? Yeah? Okay. All right. So when I say that girls, women all over the world are the same, it's some fundamental way. What I'm saying is really that this distribution is the same, right? And the norms of the groups might be different. So people might be doing different things, but they're doing different things because they have different norms, and this model is not trying to explain those norms, it's just looking at the implications of those norms. Right? Okay. There's a legal age of marriage, AL, okay, and there's a social norm which is AN, less than AL. And what public policy is trying to do is get more girls to reach the legal age of marriage before they get married, okay, and that's why this is important here. Okay. Now, how do we model social norms? We don't vary AN. What we do is we vary the benefit from marrying at or below the social norm. So what we're doing is we're saying that if you adhere to the norm in group G, say, then you will get a reward gamma G. It might be an expanded network, it might be someone you can borrow money from, whatever it is. It might be eating lunch together, going to people's weddings, whatever it is. Okay? And so this gamma is what varies by group, and that's what we're using to capture norms. Right? Now, there's a cash transfer program through which a household receives an amount T if it marries at or above the legal age. And that's all there is to it pretty much. Okay, so that's the basic framework. All right, so now I have to tell you how income and the age of marriage enter into a utility function. So let me go ahead and do that. So preferences are given by U of C, so I separate them again to be simple. I say there's a consumption part of those preferences, right, and there's this linear part. Okay. Forget about these I's, this I for now, let me come to it. So if you get married, irrespective of when you get married, you get utility from consumption. In a world where there is no transfers from the government, that is just, this C is just going to be equal to M, which is your income. All right. Okay. Then if now there is a social norm, AN, and you adhere to that norm, which means that you marry below the norm age, then you get an additional gamma. So that's why this gamma is multiplied by an indicator function I, which takes the value 1 if you are less than equal to AN. Okay? All right. But there is also a cost because you are moving away from your preferences. So this last term here captures that cost. It's the distance, very simply the Euclidean distance, the distance we all know, between your preferred age and your actual age. All right. So because we're talking about marriage ages, I've used notation A, right. But think about any kind of norm, and then think of A as just being for action, whatever action it is. Okay. Whether the action is how much you spend on a marriage, right, or what clothes you wear, or whatever you want, whatever you're trying to understand. Okay. All right. So this, I think I've said this already, C is just income plus transfers, all right. We assume that U is your usual shape, it is increasing and concave, okay. I is an indicator function and this is just the distance. So, everything that I am going to do from now on is just working through an example rather than prove propositions, and the example is going to be very simple. So, you can work with me on pencil and paper, just get a piece of paper out so that you are convinced I am doing the right thing and can catch me out when I am not, okay. All right. So, the example is just that U of C is the square root of C, okay, and AP has a uniform distribution on A lower bar, A upper bar, okay. M is 100, okay. Your norm age is 16 and your legal age is 18, okay, very, very simple, okay. So, if you did not have any norms, what would be your utility? It would just be the square root of 100, which is 10, okay. So, you can see it is very simple, you can just plug numbers in and that is all we are going to do here, and you will see what is going on. All good? Okay. So, now let us look at this distribution. So, we have got U of C is equal to 10 in the baseline, okay, and now we have this distribution of marriage ages. So, remember A is uniform between 15 and 19. So, this is what the distribution function looks like. It is just a line, okay. The density function would be what? It would be at a quarter, it would go on for 4 units, right, 15 to 19, all right. So, half the population is getting married below 17, say 15 to 17 is halfway, 3/4 is getting married below 18. Okay, and what public policy is trying to do is push this number. All right. Okay. Okay, now let us think about how norms are working. So, suppose your preferred outcome is less than the norm. So, you want to get married at 15, your family wants you to get married at 15 and it does not matter what the norm is. So, these people are going to be very happy when there is a norm in society, because they do not have to change their behavior, but they get a little bit of an extra boost from gamma. So, their actions get validated and rewarded and yet they do not want to change them at all, they do not have to change them. Okay? All right. Now, for people whose preferred age of marriage is bigger than AN, there is this trade off, right. They are giving up something because they are marrying above their preferred age or below their preferred age depending on what they do, right. And so, when there is a norm but no transfers, then all the people with AP above AN, right, have to decide whether to follow the norm or to do what they would like to do. And there is going to be a cutoff value A tilde at which the family is just indifferent between following the norm and not following it. Okay? And so, whenever we get a gamma, we get a new distribution of marriage ages, and so this is the old distribution, and suppose gamma is equal to 1, say, as it is over here, then what you are going to do is you are going to pull everyone who has a preferred age between 16 and 17, you are going to pull them into 16, right. And so, what is going to happen to your distribution function is going to go along like this, and then at this point it will jump up and go to a half. So, rather than a quarter of the people getting married below 16, you now have half the people getting married at or below 16, right. Nobody is getting married between 16 and 17 then, once you have got the norm coming in, and then you go back to where you were. Yeah? All right. Now, suppose you have the norms and the transfers. Now, what is going to happen is that you have a transfer term coming in here, and so now people will say we have 3 choices basically. We can do what we wanted doing before the norms, before the transfers, we can ignore all of it, right, and just have AP. In that case, our utility will be 10, which is just from our income, okay. Or we can follow the norm, or we can follow the legal age and get the transfer. So, they are just going to compare their utility in these 3 states and choose whichever one will make them better off, all right. So, when they do that, they are choosing one of 3 values, AN, AP and AL, right. and the effect of the program which we measure is what is the increase in the fraction of legal marriages. So, how many people now move to AL from somewhere below AL? All right, that is what we are interested in. Okay. So, graphically this is what is happening. Suppose you think of gamma being relatively small and your transfer being relatively small. One thing that is clear is if your transfer is large enough, you are just throwing money at the household. You can get them to do anything in this framework, right. You throw enough at them and everyone will get married at the legal age. So, what we are interested in is when these transfers are relatively modest, which is what happens in public programs. This is not the only thing the government is doing, right. Okay. So, then what is going to happen is that you have this program effect, and if the transfer that you are making is relatively small, then you are not going to interfere with the fraction getting married at the norm. So, nothing is happening at the norm, right, but you have all these people who are moving from below the legal age to the legal age, and this is what I call your program effect. Okay. And this is the norm effect. Now, you can see what is happening here, that if norms are small, right, if these gamma levels are small, you can have different groups with different levels of gamma, but it is not going to affect the effect of the program, because all these gammas are going to be to the left of this effect. All right. So, suppose now you have many groups, but all of them have small levels of gamma, low levels of gamma. Then when you introduce the transfer, the effect will be the same for all of these groups if the transfer is small enough. And the transfer will not do anything to the fraction getting married at the norm age. So, if you have a big gamma, you will get more people marrying at the norm age. You have a small gamma, you have fewer people marrying at the norm age. But when the transfer program comes in, all these norms are going to stay intact. Okay. Now, as the transfer gets larger, you are going to hit those norm ages, right, and you will start eroding the norm. Okay. So, that is one picture. Now, I want you to look at the same graph and imagine it to be different. Suppose now we had this gamma not modest, but this gamma was actually all the way up here, right. That means that even if your preferred age is 18.2, right, even if your preferred age is 18.2, you end up marrying at 16 because your norm is so strong. Okay. Now, think about the person who is sitting here at 18.2. That girl really does not want to marry at 16, but because the norm is so strong, she is marrying at 16. What is her utility? Her utility is just what she is getting from the norm, right. Okay. Now, when you introduce the transfer, the marginal person who is following the norm is really just getting u of m. They are not getting anything from the norm, because the amount that they are getting from the norm is just offsetting the distance of their preferred age from where they are, right. So, suppose you have a norm of 2.2, then this gamma will reach all the way to 18.2, right. But this girl who has got her preferred age of marriage at 18.2 is getting gamma of 2.2, but she is losing a distance of 2.2 also, because she wants to marry at 18.2, but she is marrying at 16. So, at the margin you are exactly offsetting these two things. Now, you give this girl a small transfer and she is going to move away from the norm to the legal age, because she wanted to be at the legal age in any case. It was just the group that was giving the strong norm. And so, that is the sense in which norms are providing agency to people at the margin. Okay. Now, suppose that this norm was not 2.2, but suppose the norm was 1.8, right. Okay. Then the marginal person is going to be a little here at 17.8. Okay. Now you give them the transfer and they will not move as much, because even though they will move, right, you are going to get a program effect. The point is that the marginal person does not want to marry at the legal age. So, they have a cost for moving to the legal age and they have a cost of the norm. Whereas, people who are out here with very strong norms, they have no cost for moving to the legal age, because that is where they wanted to be in any case, and that is the logic. That is why strong norms can actually have can actually be more amenable to transfers. It might be strong norm groups that are most affected by these cash transfers, right. Okay. And so, you can see that what I have done here, and you can do a pencil and paper exercise for yourself right now or later, where what I have done is I have compared the effect of gamma is equal to 2.8 with gamma is equal to 2, okay. And in both cases I have kept the transfer at 21. And why have I kept it at 21? Because the square root of 121 is 11. So, you can do it pencil and paper, you do not have to take anything for given, alright. And so, you can see that the effect for the 2.8, the program effect, is actually larger than the program effect for gamma is equal to 2. And this is really the, when we first did this, and it always happens whenever there is a paper that I end up being happy with, there is some point in the paper when you feel you have messed up. Go check your program, because this was not supposed to happen, it is happening. So, that is another lesson in doing research, right, that if you feel you have gone wrong, you could be completely wrong. That is what happens about 80% of the time. But about 20% of the time you could be on to something interesting, because this is when the model starts to speak to you. Until some point, whenever you are writing down a model, until some point the only thing in the model is stuff that you have put in. It is like making a toy, you know. You are only, you know, there is someone putting the wood together and all of this together, and at some point it sort of gets a personality and then starts talking back to you, and that is, if it never does that, then you probably did not need the model in the first place. If it did that, then you have got something interesting, because you can start learning from it. Yeah, so the question is really to think about what we mean by rigid norms, right. So, you know, at the moment the cash transfer, so can it help or not help? So, suppose the norms are really rigid in this society, there's you know, as usual in economics, you often have to separate the total from the marginal, right. So, when norms are very rigid, suppose norms are really strong, you have a lot of people marrying at 16, right. Now, you give a cash transfer and you will move people, you will move some people to the legal age. So, on the margin you might have a big effect, but in the total you might not have a big effect. There might be a lot of people still marrying at that norm, and so that is my answer to your question, that in the aggregate you might not have a big effect. But if you are looking at the bang that you are getting for a buck of transfer, you might get quite a big effect at the margin, you know. Absolutely not. So, that's a very important issue, and I think that the evidence that we have on a lot of programs that have really worked, it's not been through cash transfers at all. So, thank you for that question, because I do not want any of this to be interpreted as saying that, look, cash transfers is the way out. The point we are making here is that if you think that cash transfers are not working simply because you have strong norms, then what you want to do is really look at the groups with strong norms and the groups with weak norms and see whether those marginal effects are different. And all I am saying is that the marginal effect could be higher for the strong norm group. Now, do you need cash transfers to change norms? And I actually think that the non-cash ways of changing norms are more powerful most of the time. For example, you know, when you had this scheme for bicycles in Bihar, and you gave bicycles to girls for going to school. if you went and checked, if you went and checked whether it was really a conditional program, I mean, did they really go to school only if they had the bicycle, and did they get the bicycle money only if they bought the bicycle? No, they basically got the bicycle money. But it turned out that because they were getting the bicycle money, a lot of the parents were spending it on this, and a lot more girls went to school.
On bicycle or something else?
Bicycles.
Spending it on the bicycle.
We found a lot of them were really spent on the bicycle, even though the monitoring was very weak. How are you going to really check? Anyone can give you a bill, you know. If you've taught as many years as I have, you know perfectly well that medical certificates really don't mean very much, right? Nor do bills. But they were actually spending it on the bicycle. All right. Another thing, when you think about your behavior, we did an experiment on plastic use. My first PhD student at the school did an experiment where she was looking at incentives to reduce plastic bag use in Delhi's shopping areas. And we found the biggest effect was just actually putting up posters for this. And then we had marginal effects when we gave them extra money to bring a bag and so on, but those were relatively small compared to the big effect. And we found that if you put a positive message in the poster, it had a bigger effect than a negative message in the poster. So there are a lot of things that matter, and that's why this field of behavioral economics and psychology and economics, these are very important growing fields, because they take into account the fact that we don't only care about the dollar bottom line or the rupee bottom line. Okay. But what is important is that if cash transfers are in your menu of instruments, it's important to understand how they're working and how they're not working, right? Okay, so what are our results broadly? Suppose you have weak norms. Suppose you have weak norms and small transfers, then nothing is going to happen to your norms, and you will have a similar effect of the transfer across different social groups. Okay. If you have intermediate transfers, then you are going to have, so suppose your transfers are somewhere over here where you start to hit this A tilde, right. Then you will have a smaller effect for the group with stronger norms, because remember, you have to compensate them for the norm, whereas you don't have to do it for a weak norm group. But now suppose you have really strong norms which means that you are getting people who would rather be married at the legal age are being pulled into the norm. In that case, even a small transfer is going to start to shake your norms, right, because a marginal person really doesn't want to follow the norm. All right, and the program effect is increasing in the strength of the norm over some range. All right, so convince yourself of the arithmetic later on. Let me just show you some numerical simulations in the interest of time. So here you have the transfer, right, and here are 4 different lines for different norms. So purple is gamma is equal to 1, mustard is 1.5, green is 2, and red is 2.5. So this is, red is the strongest norm. Okay. Now the fraction of legal marriages is always lower when the norm is stronger, right. That is why you have this thing going down. However, if you start to look at the program effect, look at the red, it's jumped over the green here, and it's matched the mustard here. Okay, and that's because basically for this green group now, you don't have to compensate them for going to the legal age. They want to be above the legal age in any case. There is no distance between their preferred outcome and the legal age. Okay, all right. Suppose I look at this simulation a little bit differently, and now what I am doing is I am looking across different levels of gamma. I am letting gamma vary continuously, and I am looking at different transfer levels here. And here is where you see the non-monotonicity here. So as long as gamma is pretty small, you can have the same effect. You have a given transfer, you have the same effect independent of the norm, right? But in all these cases, there comes a point when you start to get this U shape. So the effect of the transfer is going to be the same for this level of gamma and for this level of gamma. So that's the non-monotonicity here. Okay? And here you have another set of values now where the transfers get very large. And you can see when there's a transfer of 96, it's so large that you don't have this thing going down at all. Once again, you've got a lot of people coming into the legal age.
These simulations are based on experiment or?
No, these are just numerical simulations of the, given the parameters that I gave you, the example I gave you. So all I'm doing is I'm putting that in Python and I'm just saying, okay, how many people would be marrying at the legal age? So there's no data here. They're just purely numerical. Okay? All right, so now let me turn to the empirics and see how we look at this. How am I doing for time? 10 to 15 minutes, yeah, that should be fine. Yeah, okay. All right, so if you look at the trends in child marriage, and again when you're doing empirical work in economics, you really need to think about where you get your variation from, right? Because that's where you're going to be able to identify any effects, all right? And so now when you're looking at trends in child marriage, if you're looking between 2005-6, which was the third round of the NFHS, and the fifth round of the NFHS, you find there's a huge decline in child marriage rates. So we have the same scale here, and you can't read this, but this is more than 40% child marriage. This is at the state level, right? And so you see this big block here, and this pretty much disappears by this time. And if you're looking at a state like Haryana, you went for more than 40% child marriages, and this is the women aged 20 to 24, and how many of them got married before 18. And it was 40% in NFHS 3, it's about 12% in NFHS 5. So there's been this dramatic decline, right? And so when you see that, you know that you're not going to be able to look at Haryana before Abad and after Abad, because there's too much going on. There's a trend that's downward. So you have to think about an alternative, tighter identification strategy. All right, so what do you do? So what we decided to do was to look by caste, because we said that, look, caste norms are usually pretty strong. Marriage norms are often caste based, and we spent a long time trying to match the Jati level data in the NFHS 4, and so we found that there were a number of castes, the Banyas, the Jat 6, Khatris, Mazhabi 6, that had relatively low marriage ages that were below 18. This is the fraction marrying below 18 of 20 to 20 this is women above 25, the fraction that got married before they were 18. Okay? And then you had some groups that had very high rates of
percentage is below the marriage age.
Yes, so it's looking at women. So in the NFHS 4, you have two sets of files. One is that are most important that we use. One is the household level file, and then you have the women's level file. So and within the women's level file, you have files that tell you when each child was born. So that those are called the birth recode files, right? Okay. So what you can do in the women's level file, you have a question on when did you get married. So what this is looking at all the women in Haryana and the neighboring states of Haryana who were 25 and above at the time of the survey, and it's their response to the question of what was your age of marriage. And then we make that into a binary variable on whether they were married before 18 or after 18. So that's what these data tell you. Okay? Okay, so let me just quickly get to the identification strategy then. So Abad came in October 1994, all right. In 1990s, but at that point, you only got Abad if you were below the poverty line or if you were among the scheduled castes then, all right. In 1906, they extended it to other backward classes, all right, and in 2005, it was replaced by a different program, okay. Now, the reason we look at Abad is because by the time you get to NFHS 4, these girls are just about reaching 18. So, you have people there who are 18 now who were eligible for Abad, okay. It would have been even better to use NFHS 5 because the girls would have been older, but there are two problems with that. One is we don't have caste data made public for the NFHS 5 and it's not going to happen from what we hear. The other thing is that COVID intervened and so things are a little bit more complicated. So, we use NFHS 4. And so, this NFHS 4 was completed in Haryana in 2015, and so the people who got this in 96 would have been just about 19. So, that would have been the oldest girls that would have been eligible, okay. And that is partly why a lot of papers haven't looked at marriage with these schemes, because these girls just haven't got old enough to look at that outcome, okay. Oh, so let me, exactly, this is it. So, what is the Abad program? It's Apni Beti Apna Dhan, that's what we're calling Abad, and it's very similar to a lot of programs in the country. If you have a girl child, provided you don't have more than 3 children, something like that, it varies across programs. Sometimes you have to have 2 girls, you know, the conditions vary. You get 500 rupees if you have an institutional delivery, you get it at birth, right? And then 2,500 used to get invested in a security, which would mean about 25,000 when they turned 18. And if they waited a little longer, you got a little bit more. Okay, so this is what it was. And so some of it was quite significant if you were thinking about marriage expenses. It wasn't a small amount of money. Okay, so now when you're thinking about the data, all right. Now the big thing is, think about what's happening on the ground. So most women are going and living in a different district, right? Or a different household for sure, okay. You don't know whether their original household was BPL or not, okay. You don't know how many siblings they had because that's not about this household, right. So, if you really want to look at the eligibility conditions carefully, you have to do something that helps you get at that. So, what we did then is we didn't use the women's files directly. We didn't use the data on the women. We used the data on the daughters of the women because we know each eligible birth for the woman. So, we know exactly what your birth order was, and we know whether you were born into a below poverty line household. Of course, we don't know whether that was true at the time of your birth or not, but at least it's the same household, it's not a different household. Okay, yeah, it's a bit confusing. It took me a long time to understand actually. Okay, so there are two files. There's the household file. The household file has your BPL status, which comes into your eligibility condition, right? The women's file actually has your age of marriage. Now the question is, what do we use from the women's file? Suppose we ask the women directly, what was your age of marriage, right? We could do that, but the problem is we don't know whether that household, because we are measuring the woman, we are looking at the woman in her, what's it called? Not in her natal household, we are looking at her in her marital household. Is that the right word? There's some other word I think. Whatever. But so we don't know whether she was the second child of the household, the first child of the household. We don't know about eligibility. However, if we look not at the woman herself, but we look at the woman's daughters, then we know exactly when they were born, and we know whether they would have been eligible for Abad based on the birth order and the caste of the household and the below poverty line. So we're using information on daughters from the woman's file. And we're not using it on the women because we don't know anything about the household which the woman came from. which is the one that would have been eligible for ABAD or not. So is that clearer? Yeah? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but they didn't do that. Oh, it's always that if you're getting information that's not contemporaneous, that's always problematic. But the basic point is that this is secondary data, right? And so they don't gather it.
I thought it was a primary data.
No, we don't have it. This is the NFHS4, right? Okay. And so you know, the thing is that there is the other lesson I would give you is that there isn't perfect data. And one thing no, it was only in Haryana.
In Haryana, university,
yeah.
BPL or anybody BPL?
No, only BPL, SC, OBC. And only provided you didn't have too many kids. So your birth order had to be less than 3. Alright? So what we do then is, I don't know if I have this, I have to hurry up. So what we did is we took Haryana and we took the neighboring districts of Haryana and we matched households in Haryana with households in the neighboring districts. So we did an initial matching, and so our identification strategy was compare households that are eligible for ABAD and not eligible for ABAD in Haryana, right, with households across the border that would have been eligible had they been in Haryana, but they're not in Haryana. Okay, that's basically what we did. All right. So the other thing is that you're never going to get perfect data, right? But yet, when you start an empirical project, it's always worth asking yourself, if I could have the perfect data set, what would this look like? That's a very important first step, because otherwise you can't measure how far you are from there. All right? Okay. So the other thing is, we don't know whether someone is married or not in the NFHS 5. We only know whether a daughter is still in the household or not. But we know that more than 95% of the ones that are not in households have gone to get married. So we use that. Okay, so that's our definition of married. Okay, so for each Haryana household in each jati, we construct a sample across the border that matches the caste composition of that household. Right, and that's our estimation sample. Okay. And so what we're doing, for example, in Haryana, right, we have 45 Brahmin households, only 2 of them are eligible because you have only the BPL that will be eligible, and then 43 are ineligible, and this is across the border in Uttar Pradesh, right. And so what we do is, suppose we have 6 eligible here. Then what we do is we give each household a weight of 1/3 to match the Haryana sample with the border sample. Okay? Okay, so this is basically what we're doing. This is Haryana. These are the bordering districts in Punjab, Rajasthan, UP and Himachal, right? And what we're doing is we're comparing outcomes for eligible and ineligible households across the border with Haryana. Okay, that's the differences in difference strategy that we're following. So that's basically our estimating equation. This is a binary for whether or not you are married, right? And our main outcome variable is, are you unmarried when you are surveyed, right? Okay, if you were born in the household but are unmarried, okay, for all girls between 15 and 18. And this is if you are eligible and in Haryana. This is if you would be eligible if you were in Haryana, okay? And this is a state fixed effect, okay? And then further what we do is we split this group by age into the 15-year-olds and the 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, okay? That's basically what we're doing. Okay, and this is what our results are. So we find nothing at all if we're looking at the aggregate sample. However, if we look at only rural areas where we think that norms are a bit stronger, we find effects at 18, and these effects are quite sizable. They have large standard errors, but they're still sizable. Okay. Now, what happens when we, I'm not going to go through the details, but what we do is we find a way of estimating the norms based on the literature. Given the time, I can't go into this right now. I'm happy to talk to you about it later, but apparently there's a class here. And so then when we think about it into the weak norms and the strong norms, we actually find the biggest effects with the strong norm groups around the age of 18. So that's what broadly matches our theoretical predictions. Okay, then we do one different thing with the NFHS 5 data, because now you can observe these girls longer. Okay, we can't match their caste, but we can look and see whether they are unmarried at 20 or not. Okay, because we observe them longer, and we can look at the age at which they got married. Okay, so now we're looking at these two criteria, and we find that if we look at girls that were born before Abad came in, we find no effects on either marriage age or the probability of getting married. So these are girls that were born between 90 and 93. These are girls that were born between 96 and 99. Okay? And if we look at these girls, then after Abad came in, they're getting married about 7 months later, and the probability of being unmarried at 20 is 8 to 9 percentage points higher. So we, you know, that's broadly the different estimates that we provide. I'll skip that, and I've been knocked out of here. Okay, I had a last remark slide, but it's gone somewhere. Okay, that's fine. So all I was going to say, there was nothing much I was going to say in that slide. All I was going to say that when you think about norms, you know, there's a lot going on there. Oh, okay. So if you're thinking about culture, culture creates social capital, but culture also reduces agency, right? And I think that when you're having policies that target norms, I think you can separately think about what you're doing to each of these things. That's an interesting line of research. The other thing is that when you're trying to estimate average treatment effects or treatment effects on the treated, these are complex decompositions of heterogeneous group effects. So you really want to look at it closer, split the groups up and see what's going on. And as a general finding, almost in every empirical project I've done, I haven't found anything for a couple of years. Don't give up, because there's usually something that's there if you look carefully enough. And if you feel there's nothing there, you still want to be really careful that there's nothing there. So keep at it. Don't try to find a specification that works, that gives you stars. All right, just try to split up your sample in many different ways and just see where the action is. And the other thing is that when you feel there's something interesting to say theoretically, then you're never going to find comparable effects in different parts of the world. All right, because the whole thing about applied theory is there is an effect if this condition holds and not if this condition holds. So you shouldn't get thrown off if everyone else is finding, you know, 3 percentage points and you're finding no effect at all, or you're finding 8 percentage points. There's usually a reason for that if you've done your work carefully enough. All right, so those are the quick lessons for you. Good luck with your work going forward, no matter what you do, academic or non-academic. Okay, always look at numbers carefully and see what might be going on. That's quite an exciting business. Yeah. All right, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take a few questions.
Sure.
But one or two things, what I liked in the presentation are two parts of it. One is trying to do a simple model of a particular aspect. You take it, find out what is an aspect that one wants to model and make a very interesting, simple model. I think students would have something to ask. The second is the empirical part, which is again interesting, and in a short period of time, it takes us some time to absorb what is being said. These are things, and before I open up to faculties, because they might be having some specific questions on the research as well as model. So I'll ask the questions first from any students who would like to ask. Yeah. Let's keep the questions sharp and to the point.
Sir. Little long. Not very long, but little long. I see in your model, I see two different kind of assumptions. One is your preferences are independent from your norms. One. Second, your norms has only one shot effect on your outcome. It is not a in future there is no effect. That is one thing. Second is, what if it is not the norm that is making them marry lesser than the legal age, but it is something that is, there is no norms such that the age should be 18, something like. For example, in urban areas, you don't find significant effect, not because there is no strong norm, but because in urban areas there is strong norm towards marrying towards 18 years. But you are seeing the effect in the Abad, whatever that thing, in rural areas, because Abad is acting as one strong norm which influencing where there is no norm. It is becoming one norm, not only an incentive. That's why you are seeing the significant effect in the rural areas. Those are my thought process.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I'm not sure how to, because I saw your model and from what I understand, or my intuitive understanding is, or my intuitive inference would be, the age of, the preference age matters rather than the strength of norm. Because if someone, if a norm is at 15 and the effect is at 16, and some preference is at 17 or 16.5, the effect would be very less. Whereas in the same norm system, but if the preference age is above 18 or closer to 18, the expected outcome of marriage at legal age would be higher. So, I'm just thinking that should we focus more on the strength of the norm, or should we look at the shifting the preference age so that we can get the outcome?
As you ask questions, could you introduce yourself so that when I ask them back, when I respond to you, I can remember?
Yes, ma'am. I'm Santosh from second year masters.
Your name again? Santosh.
I am Shravan from second year masters.
Sorry, your name again?
Shravan.
Shravan.
Namaste madam, I am Siddhant Shukla. So my question is, while conditional transfers may temporarily shift the marriage norms and delay in the marriage ages, but how do these policies account for the deeply ingrained cultural and symbolic meanings of marriage? Like there are different norms in different castes and different regional groups. So the symbolic meaning of marriages is different in every different regional and groups and caste groups. So they may resist the economical intervention in marriages, and also the long-term implications of this alteration. What do you think the sociological impact of these cash transfers and these interventions may affect in the sociological conditions in these groups?
Your name again?
Siddhant Shukla.
Okay, so let me quickly take care of these and then. I think, Shravan, there are two parts to what you were asking. One is rural versus urban, right? And I think as I presented these groups as having the same norm. But it might well be the case that the reason we don't find an effect is because urban groups don't. I think that's fine now. Yeah, so that's completely valid. Responding to both of you actually, so it again depends on what you're seeking to do. What we were trying to do here was to try, we found this empirical finding that was sort of puzzling, and then we tried to build a model that would help us understand it. Now, if we were doing something very different, which was trying to see how do norms evolve over time. So when you look at this data, one thing you could do is to say, look, there's been this huge decline in the fraction marrying below 18, right? And so you might want to understand the dynamics of norms. And then I would write down a completely different model, right? So the whole point is that a model is written down to serve you. It's not written down to serve reality. That's not the point of it. And so suppose you were trying to understand the dynamic evolution of norms, you would write down a completely different thing. And it might be in some cases, you know, when people have tried to look at the evolution of norms, say for environmental protection or anything else, they might say, look, if you move far away, then you get to a new norm. If you don't, then something else can move you back to where you are. And then you might have various, you know, you might have a very complicated model in terms of your basins of attraction, some dynamics going on, but that would be serving a different purpose. So what I was trying to do here is not to look at how norms evolve over time, but rather what the implications of cash transfer programs are for a given set of norms. So that's, and responding to you, Siddhant, I would say that, you know, I think when we're in a school of social sciences, it's very often economists are accused of overreach, right? They, you know, sociologists never say we understand prices. Why are economists trying to delve into norms and saying, look, we have something to say about norms? And the fact is that I think we do. I don't think that's different from what, you know, I think that's quite different. Our contributions are quite different from what sociologists might make. They're different from political scientists. And that's why I think that the conversations matter, right? All that we are good at, economists are good at two things. We are good at thinking about incentives, and we are good at thinking about aggregation and equilibria. And I think that those two things have an important role to play. Okay? Now, suppose I was advising a football team, you know, I could say something about incentives, but I couldn't obviously tell you how to kick the ball or, you know, what to do and how to score goals and build team spirit and so on. So I think that I think it's important to draw boundaries, but also to then make those boundaries fuzzy from time to time and disturb them. And I don't think we could do what sociologists do, but I think we can contribute to the broader question. And when we do interdisciplinary work, it's important to be grounded in our disciplines, to be deep in our disciplines, and not to try and dabble too much in things we don't have an expertise in, unless we really invest in building that expertise. Yeah?
Should we take a few more questions?
Completely, I'm your, at your service, yes, whatever you would like.
I'm asking students, if they are not there, then please come back to faculty. So the mic has come to you, so there's nothing much. There's a tendency for the mic to come to you. Yes, Vijay.
Yeah, that was quite interesting, although very complicated for me to comprehend. But I guess marriage is an interdependent function, so really very reliable in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think we always, yeah.
Take 3 more, 1 more.
Yeah, okay. Okay, very quickly, I think that the data, it's the reason that we actually looked and saw whether someone was married or not. This relates to the question that was being asked earlier about couldn't you ask people about what happened before. And I think that is really problematic. But if you go to a household and there's a daughter that's being born who's still in the household and she's not married, that's the kind of data that we're using. So I don't think there's much. I think if you ask specifically about marriage, then I think there's a lot of misreporting. So suppose we asked what your marriage expenses were, whether you used it for this or that. I wouldn't trust that data too much. Here all we're doing is we're seeing whether a girl that was born during Abad is still there and whether she's unmarried. So I'm a little bit more comfortable about the data there. And you know, I think coming back to your questions of something that's long standing and culturally deep, can we change that? I think what you see in the picture was that they were changing in any case. Maybe if we were talking about 20 or 30 years ago, those norms were more rigid, but there was a lot of churning going on in any case. Otherwise we wouldn't have it overall that, you know, the rates of child marriage went down from 40% to 12%. And this was happening in any case. And now all that the cash transfers are doing is sort of working at the margin a little bit. I think there would be other contexts where you're absolutely right and the norms really were deeper and they were not changing. And then I think that maybe the cash transfers wouldn't have that kind of effect. And this comes back to what I was saying about looking for external validity. I think one of the biggest mistakes empirical economists do is look for external validity, simply because our effects and our behavior, you know, and so as a result the effects of public programs are very contextually driven, and we wouldn't expect the same effect everywhere. I think there would be other kinds of norms, like women, you know, like men doing the housework, for example. I think that's going to take a while to change, you know. I don't think cash incentives are really going to do it. And it's interesting because we looked during COVID, you know, when patterns were a bit different. And if some people have done time use surveys, and they find it changes a little bit, but it doesn't change a whole lot, you know. So I think it depends on what norm and whether something is changing it in any case, independent of the program that you're bringing in.
I'm glad you said a lot in the rebuttals, much more important things in the rebuttals. And all the doubts which I initially had, you answered. I only have 2 examples to give you further, which happened in Telangana.
Yeah.
That there is a program introduced by the TRS government called Kalyana Lakshmi and Shadi Mubarak. 50,000 rupees given if the girl is married in the legal age. So that has pushed the marriage minority marriages into the majority in this thing. But there's still not enough studies available. But this is a largely felt effect of the Shadi. Everybody thought that this is a populist program, and why should government spend on give money to marriages, etc. That criticism is still there. That's a freebie, etc. But the effect of pushing girls' marriage age has actually improved. The second negative effect is when marriage age is now, legal age is raised to 21 by the central government. And this is a disincentive kind of thing, where now if anybody who's married below 21 will come under POSCO Act, and the boy will be considered as a rape. They come under Rape Act. He'll be accused of rape. This thing, and then all kinds of very rigorous imprisonment. And then young people, they elope without knowing all these things many times at an age, and they are getting caught into this because the girls' side will cast a case of kidnap and of a minor, etc. So this is now actually resulted in a good amount of conflicts and lots of legal cases, people entangled into the age norm, which is actually expected to raise perhaps the opportunities of a woman but not getting married, so that, but poverty conditions and etc., they have not changed. So girls are forced to move out. They choose somebody to elope because even parents are wanting girl to be married even before 21 because they don't have the economic capacity to sustain them and so on. So there are so many things which get involved, and how an incentive or disincentive
Myself, Dr. Krishna Reddy. I'm just curious, is it level of education doesn't influence, because we are talking about the recent past, our literacy rates are gone up, the awareness levels also compared to those days, because the communication was very weak. But in the modern era, I think the access to the internet, to the mobiles, so the awareness has increased substantially. So can't we attribute the change of, the legal age, because even we are seeing that the legal age, people who are crossed much, it's not even 18 now, it is almost in the double age of, people are getting married. The reverse trend, there are a lot of reports which talking about late marriages and so on and so forth. So I was just curious to understand the level of education impact on this.
Yeah, any more questions?
Yeah, I go ahead.
Yeah, one more and then
Ma'am, you were talking about the norm. So I was wondering, there are other variables like access to education also plays a vital role. If you see in Kerala, the average marriage age of Syrian Christians are about 25 to 27. Meanwhile, the Muslims, it will be from 15 to 17. So there is a clear translation of access to education also plays a vital role. Don't you think that it should be also added in the model?
Yeah, shall I go ahead?
I have one small question.
Yeah.
The strong norms were an interesting model that when we constructed it. I'm not going to empirical part of it. That part of it now, a norm when is there. Yeah. So, when I'm not following the norm, is there a added cost to me as an agent?
As a?
Cost to me, because I'm breaking a norm which exists in the society, and I say 16 is there, I want to get married on 18. The society also has an extra cost. It might get back to in terms of a cost. Can one build that also into the system? Because for you it is 16 is a norm, 18 is the rule. You want to shift it there. But my agency, when I'm taking a norm has a purpose on which it's constructed. Right? I'm assuming a norm has a purpose on which it's done. It might be path dependent issues. So suppose there exists a cost for breaking a norm, which is not built into the model. If I have a cost and the cost also has some dynamics in terms of patterns, would my results start to change? So I'm saying a norm that is not only a benefit, breaking a norm also has a cost, which I don't know whether it has been incorporated. Thank you. There are some set of questions, students who want to ask some questions. So I said repeat questions are not allowed. So maybe there is a class now, maybe we go to this boardroom.
Yeah.
Who want to meet you can sit down and talk with you for half an hour.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. So let me start backwards because that's easier. So with Vijay's question, the gamma is just a net thing. So if you want it to be like with most models, you can either have a tax or a subsidy, it really doesn't matter, you find an equivalence. So you could have a cost there instead of a benefit if you wanted, or you could look at the gamma in terms of a net difference, because basically what gamma is capturing is the benefits from solidarity or benefits from group membership, and these are large, typically relative to any particular action. So that's why we modeled it as positive, but you can model it as negative, it doesn't make any difference. So that's easy to answer. On the Kerala issue, yeah, education does matter. I want to say two things, because even Krishna Reddy brought up this education. So when you're doing a cross-sectional exercise and you're saying that, look, in the cross-section, suppose I have a regression model and I'm putting things on the right-hand side, I need to control for a lot of things, and education would certainly be there. All right. Now remember that what I'm doing here is a matching and a difference in difference. So what I'm doing is for each caste group, I'm really, if there's one woman in Haryana and there are two women across the border in the neighboring district, then I'm giving those two women half the weight I'm giving the woman in Haryana. So what I'm doing here is, because I'm comparing a relatively homogeneous area and I'm comparing it within caste group really, right? So that's a different approach to identification, where you can't measure everything about a person, but if your controls and your treatments are roughly similar in composition in the aggregate, then you identify your effect through that, through the matching exercise. And so yes, of course education matters, although you know I'm a little bit wary of the social group based differences in the outcomes we see, especially because we tend to fixate on them a little bit, you know, because group membership is something we observe, and so it makes it easy to say, oh yes, you know, people from Andhra are like that, Karnataka are like that, Christians are like this, Muslims are like this, and so on. But actually all the good empirical work that I've seen tends to find that it's really in the controls. So often one group will be poorer than another group, one will be living in a more arid area than another group. And once you actually effectively control for those things, especially for geography, you find that a lot of the group level differences that we imagine disappear. And so there's very good work by Shreya Iyer at Cambridge, who has written a lot about Muslim, non-Muslim differences in India, and she finds that they really aren't there once you adequately control for things on the right hand side, like education, which you were talking about, or like poverty or other things. So that's just, I think we tend to overplay this because, and it's a natural way in which humans classify information. It's much easier for us to say someone is a man or a woman or from this group or that group or this state or that other state, rather than say, okay, this is their vector of characteristics. They have this education, this wealth, they own a washing machine and so on. But once you do all that, you know, a lot of things that we think are driven by groups are not really driven by groups. There are many things like the ones that I model that I do think are driven by groups, but we have to be careful. I want to lastly come, I think what Ramurthy was saying was something really interesting on the freebies versus on, you know, when is a freebie program that sounds like a freebie something more than that. And one good metric of that, I think, is whether the program is copied or not and how much, you know. And so in Tamil Nadu, Jayalalitha was one of the earliest people who came up with these programs for girls, and she had many faults and qualities. She's an interesting political leader. A couple of the things that she did really stuck later on. One of the things were these canteens. You know, she had these Amma canteens where you had these idlis very cheap. And another thing that really stuck were really girl programs. And she really in some ways thought out of the box. And she said, look, if you have a girl child that you don't want, you can leave her in front of the primary school or the healthcare center, and there was this creche program. This was really completely thinking out of the box, you know. And so a lot of times I think we do, especially close to elections, we spend money on a lot of things where, you know, which don't have lasting effects on the kind of society we'd like to build. But some of the things that we classify as freebies are not so, not such a waste of money, I think. There's another thing you said that was really interesting on the incentives, this 18 to 21, because I've been thinking about it a lot. And one of the things that we are trained to do as economists is think about incentives, right? And what happens, so you have an ideal position, and then somebody says, I will give you something if instead you take some position. Now, if you take that position that is very far away from where you want to be, you're going to mess things up. It's not really giving you incentives. If you can get close enough to where you want to be, you get pushed along a little bit. And I think that's very important with this whole legal age issue. I think it's completely crazy actually, the 18 versus 21 thing. Given that the age of voting is 18, given that you're thinking about, you know, getting a driving license when you're 18, I think it's one of these things where you're taking it too far and you might do more harm than good. So I completely agree with you. So let's stop there and get the next class in, and I'm happy to meet anyone you
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of School of Economics and Econlog at University of Hyderabad, it's my privilege to deliver vote of thanks to all those who have contributed in the success of this event. On the session on the topic, public policy in the presence of social norms. First and foremost, I take this opportunity to express my heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished speaker, Dr. Rohini Somanathan, who graciously accepted our invitation and enlightened us with an insightful talk. Her words made us understand how strong and weak social norms influence public policies and how incentives can work to get desired outcomes. I extend my sincere gratitude to Professor R. Vijay, Dean of School of Economics, for chairing the session. I would also like to thank Professor Srijit Mishra and Dr. G. Vijay for their tireless efforts in coordinating this event. Finally, my sincere thanks to each and every one of you present over here. Your support and participation made this event a grand success. With that, I formally conclude this session by once again thanking our speaker, chair, coordinators, and audience. Thank you all.